I've always admired authors who create a fictional version of their real homes. The Albany of William Kennedy, Elena Ferrante's Naples, the Monterey Peninsula of John Steinbeck. Over the course of 9 books, I've ventured far away to New York and the Zero, Italy and Hollywood and beautiful ruins. But I always find myself coming back to Spokane. They woke on a ball field, bums, tramps, hobos, stiffs. They floated in from mines and farms and log camps, filled every flop and boarding house, slept in parks and alleys, and on the night just past, this abandoned ball field. My new novel, The Cold Millions, begins here, Peaceful Valley, Spokane, Washington, 1909. The book mixes fiction and history in a way that's almost impressionistic, blending past events with present concerns. My first inspirations were these old postcards that I collect of my hometown from the early 1900s. Living in Spokane can feel like living among ghosts. Every day you walk in the turn of the 20th century. The buildings, the streets, the ground under your feet. This was a period I'd wanted to write about for years, the end of the last Gilded Age, when Spokane was only a few decades old, lurching from wild frontier town to modern city, doubling in size every 6 or 7 years to nearly the place it is now. Buildings that now house thriving coffee shops and brew pubs were once a mix of brothels and bars, banks and boarding houses, vaudeville theaters and flop houses for miners and farmers. Brutal cops and private detectives skulked downtown with rifles peeking out beneath their trench coats, and thousands of itinerant workers, hobos, came by train from all over looking for work. This is the postcard that first sparked my imagination. As a writer, you stare at something like this and you can't help but wonder about the details, the things that live behind the official history. The packed streetcars, the casinos, a woman in white moving across the frame, a man walking down a side street. This is where the novelist steps in to ask, what are they all doing down there? The story I set out to tell was based on real events. The free speech riots of 1909 in Spokane and the Wobblies, the industrial workers of the world, the first union to take women, freed slaves, Native Americans, anyone with a job could be a Wobbly. It's a story of social unrest, of police brutality, of deep inequality, of the ache of wanting a better world, issues that resonate today. The IWW was outlawed from speaking and organizing on the streets. In Spokane, Wobblies staged the first successful nonviolent protests in U.S. history, a model for civil rights leaders and other peaceful activists. Speeches dissolved into riots, police and private goons beat protesters, there were mass arrests, 500 people locked up, the jails so full they threw prisoners in an old high school. The Cold Millions is the story of Gig and Ride Dolan, adventuring vagrant brothers who get swept up in this turbulent class warfare. It's also the story of 2 women they meet. Ursula the Great, who sings on a vaudeville stage with a live cougar, and the labor activist and suffragist Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, a courageous, pregnant 19-year-old who comes to Spokane to lead the fight for justice. My research involved books, academic papers, letters, hundreds of newspapers. But in Spokane, you can walk right through history, like walking through a neighborhood filled with the mansions of mining magnates. Or a simple clapboard house where Spokane's police chief was shot to death through the window by an assassin. The ghosts are everywhere. Even though it's fiction, I began to think of this novel as a loose origin story for my hometown, connecting the place we are now to the place we were then. But it's also a kind of origin story for my own working class family. Both of my grandfathers were itinerant workers in the West who found their way to Eastern Washington a generation later. My dad was a steelworker and union leader for 40 years. It's the truth of both history and historical fiction, I think, that the deeper you look into the past, the more you find yourself encountering the present moment. I know that was the case with The Cold Millions. These themes, the nature of progress, our endless struggle for social equality, they churn at the heart of this novel the way the Spokane River cuts through my western city, unceasing and inevitable, carving a path through time and stone to the ocean. Thank you for visiting my town. I hope you enjoy The Cold Millions.